deportation of several individuals after a lawsuit cited fears related to wartime laws. The plaintiffs argued that deportation during the current conflict could violate international human rights standards and put lives at risk. The ruling marks a significant pause amid escalating legal battles over immigration policies. The lawsuit claims that deporting individuals to conflict zones is both inhumane and legally questionable under wartime protections. Advocacy groups praised the decision, highlighting the need for humane immigration practices during ongoing global conflicts. The government is expected to appeal the ruling, arguing that the court overstepped its authority by interfering with deportation procedures. As tensions rise over immigration enforcement, legal experts predict that the case could set a precedent for future deportation policies during times of conflict. The Department of Justice has not yet commented on the ruling or indicated its next steps. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov spoke recently to discuss the next stage in talks on ending Moscow's war against Ukraine. There were no talks about the next round of US-Russia talks that are to happen in Saudi Arabia. However, Rubio updated Lavrov on military activity in the Middle East, where US forces carried out deadly strikes against the Houthi rebel targets in Yemen. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has not, however, agreed to any truce, instead setting conditions that were beyond what was called in the US agreement with Ukraine. Marco Rubio made the following remarks during an interview in Canada 1 day ahead of the meeting.
There has to be some level of concessions. What those concessions are remains to be seen. That'll have to be part of the negotiation. But it's not going to be helpful to enter into those negotiations making blanket statements that may give an excuse for one side or the other not to participate in it. So we'll have to get to that stage where these things are discussed, and ultimately both sides, whatever happens, both sides will have to agree to it. And that's true of any negotiation when you're trying to end.
Staying in North America, and at least 33 people have died in the United States, including 12 in Missouri alone, after deadly tornadoes tore through several southeastern states, flipping cars and flattening homes. In Kansas, at least 8 people died after more than 55 vehicles were involved in a crash due to a dust storm. More than 170,000 properties were without power across 5 states, including Michigan, Missouri and Illinois. Further severe weather is expected for the region, with tornadoes watches issues across eastern Louisiana, western Georgia, central Tennessee and the western Florida panhandle. As per a report, the destructive storms fueled more than 100 wildfires in several central states and overturned multiple semi-trailer trucks. The governors of Arkansas and Georgia have both declared a state of emergency, as weather is expected to grow more extreme from late Saturday onwards. Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee has also released $250,000 as a disaster recovery fund to help injured people. The extreme weather conditions caused by the storm system moving across the country are set to affect more than 100 million people across the United States. US President Donald Trump's administration has put journalists at Voice of America and other US-funded broadcasters on leave, abruptly freezing outlets. Voice of America's director revealed that all of the organization's employees have been put on leave. This comes shortly after the Congress passed its latest funding bill to avert a government shutdown. US Agency for Global Media, which houses Voice of America, Radio Free Europe and Asia, and Radio Marti, which beams Spanish language news into Cuba, will minimize the functions. Agency for Global Media Director Michael Abramowitz has said that for the first time in 83 years, the storied Voices of America is being silenced. The Agency for Global Media also sent notices terminating grants to Radio Free Asia and other programming run by the agency. The network's president and CEO Stephen Kappas said in a statement that the cancellation of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's grant agreement would be a massive gift to America's enemies. The Agency for Global Media is considered to be an arm of US diplomacy, running media organisations like Voice of America that transmits the country's domestic news to other countries, often translated into local languages. Radio Free Asia, Europe and Marti beam news into countries with authoritarian regimes in those regions like China, North Korea and Russia. To the Middle East, and the first phase of the ceasefire agreement ended 2 weeks ago, but Israel is refusing to implement the scheduled second phase, which is supposed to end with its withdrawal from Gaza, the freedom of all remaining hostages held by Hamas, and a definitive end to the conflict. Currently, both sides have refrained from returning to war, though Israel has conducted an intensifying series of airstrikes in Gaza that have killed dozens of Palestinians. The Ministry of Health in Gaza reported that Israeli fire had killed 19 people in the past 48 hours. The death toll in the 15-month Israeli offensive in Gaza now stands at higher than 48,500, most of those civilians. Hamas still has 59 hostages, of whom 35 are believed to be deceased. For 2 weeks, Israel has barred the delivery of food, fuel and other supplies to Gaza's roughly 2 million Palestinians and cut electricity to the territory a week ago to pressure Hamas to accept the new proposal. To South America, an oil spill in northwestern Ecuador has led to a state of emergency as crude oil leaked into a major river, contaminating water supplies. Authorities are now rationing drinking water to affected communities. The spill has raised serious environmental and health concerns as officials rush to contain the damage. Ecuador's government is working with environmental agencies to assess the full impact and begin clean-up operations. Local residents have expressed fear and frustration over the lack of clean water and the potential long-term effects on their health and livelihoods. Environmental activists have criticised the government for not implementing stricter safety measures to prevent such accidents. Meanwhile, officials are urging residents to conserve water and remain cautious while the clean-up continues. Here is what a local farmer had to say.
Tengo afectadas algunas hectáreas de cacao que se quemaron. Ese petróleo en el primer momento sale a muy alta temperatura, eso quemaba. De ahí la fauna fluvial, en eso tenemos mucho problema porque muchos muchachos que estaban acostumbrados a pescar en el río, ahora solamente han tenido que acercarse a ver peces muertos.
Back to the Middle East, and Israel has announced plans to pursue indirect talks with Hamas to discuss a possible ceasefire. The move comes amid escalating violence and growing calls for de-escalation from the international community. Israeli officials say the talks will be mediated by third parties to reduce direct contact. The ceasefire discussions follow days of intense fighting, with both sides suffering casualties and significant infrastructure damage. Israeli leaders stressed that any agreement must include guarantees for long-term security and the cessation of rocket fire. Hamas has not yet formally responded to the announcements, but local sources indicate a cautious willingness to explore ceasefire options. Mediators from Gaza and Egypt are expected to play key roles in facilitating dialogue between the two sides. Here's what Israeli locals have had to say.
לצערי אני חושב שנתניהו מנסה לסכל וימשיך לנסות לסכל, אבל אנחנו פה בשביל לעצור את זה ולמנוע את הסיכוי. ונעשה כל מה שאנחנו יכולים כדי למנוע את הסיכוי.
To Europe, and hundreds of thousands of protesters have flooded the streets of Belgrade, demanding justice for the 15 lives lost in the November collapse of Novi Sad railway station. The protest, which started with students, has now included farmers, military veterans and other groups, making it the largest in Serbia's history. Demonstrators accuse the government of negligence and corruption, claiming that corner cutting led to the tragedy. They are demanding full transparency and justice, including the public release of renovation documents. While some officials have resigned, President Alexander Vučić refuses to step down, calling the opposition a criminal cartel. Police have arrested 22 people and 56 have been injured as protests continue to escalate. Students say they won't stop until they get the answers they demand. The death toll from an explosion in Syria's coastal city of Latakia has risen to 10. The blast, which occurred in the Al Ramal neighbourhood, was triggered when a scrap dealer mishandled unexploded munitions inside a hardware store. Among the dead are 3 children and a woman. There, 14 people who were injured, including 4 children. Search and rescue operations continue as officials work to extract those still trapped under the rubble. Syria remains heavily contaminated with unexploded munitions.